Hello, I'm Anthony Schaeffer. For over 25 years now, I've been a psychic investigator in my spare time. I've been called in by all manner of people to help sort out ghosts, unquiet spirits, poltergeists, haunted furniture, haunted buildings, in fact, just about any type of paranormal activity you can name. What follows is just a small section of my vast files on every investigation I've ever conducted. All that you hear is absolutely true. The paranormal, or occult if you prefer, exists. It touches us all, although most of us don't realize it. Don't dismiss it out of hand. It might touch you next, and then you might feature in the Schaeffer Files. My first story concerns a piece of haunted furniture, a haunted monk's bench to be precise. Now, in case you don't know, this is a sort of storage chest, highly carved and ornate, with a high back on it so that it looks like a carved bench. The seat part is the storage area. Anyway, a family moved into a large house in Alderley Edge. You know the type, one which looks as if it was made to house antiques. And as a moving-in present, a friend brought them this monk's bench. It fitted in perfectly with the surroundings. Everything was all right for a while, until one night the husband was awoken by the sound of a child crying quietly. Thinking it was one of his children, he got up and went to see what was wrong. But both his daughters were sleeping peacefully. Yet he could still hear the crying. It seemed to be coming from downstairs, so he went down to investigate. The crying got louder and was very pathetic. When the man went into the hall, he found that the crying seemed to be coming from the monk's bench, but when he opened it, there was nothing there, and furthermore, the sound stopped immediately. So he closed the lid and started to go back upstairs. But he felt what he described as a deep sense of sorrow and despair, which he couldn't explain. Anyway, he went back to bed, and the next day he said nothing to his wife about the incident. But the next night, the same thing happened again. And once again, when he located the sound as coming from the bench and he opened it, the sound stopped. This went on for a whole week, until at last the man decided to tell his wife about it. And she admitted that she also had heard the crying, but somehow was too frightened to find out where it was coming from, so she pretended to be asleep, even though she knew her husband had been to investigate. Well, they decided to investigate further, so the next night they sat up, waiting. And sure enough, at about 1 a.m., they felt the atmosphere grow noticeably colder. Then they saw a shadowy shape, quite small like a child, appear near the monk's bench. There was no sound of crying at this time. The shape seemed to drift about for a while, and then it came towards the bench. By now, it had taken on the clear appearance of a child of about 8, wearing clothes which suggested Victorian times. She had on a dark dress, over which was a white pinafore. The dress had a high collar. She was also wearing quite heavy shoes. Remember, all this time, it was still very cold. Anyway, the child stopped at the monk's bench, looked around as if to check that nobody was looking, and then opened it. They actually saw the lid open. The child climbed in and closed the lid. There was silence for a while, and just as the man was going to investigate, the crying started. They opened the lid, but there was nobody there. But the sound of crying was very clear and seemed to be coming from the interior of the bench. The man and woman were, needless to say, rather shocked and not a little frightened. They closed the lid again, but the crying became, if anything, more pathetic, so they opened it again, and the sound stopped. Well, they didn't get much sleep for the rest of that night, and the next day they decided to go to the local vicar and ask his advice. Naturally, the vicar went to the house to experience for himself this strange phenomenon, which he did. He then tried to get permission to conduct an exorcism, but for various reasons he couldn't. So he put the couple in touch with me, as we had had several discussions in the past about the church's attitude to the paranormal, which rather surprised the couple actually, and I arranged to go and see them. Well, I duly arrived, and by the end of the next night, I had experienced the same as the family who owned the house. I'd recorded the crying sounds and had almost filmed it. I say almost because although I saw the child open the lid and climb in, the only thing which came out on the videotape was the lid apparently opening by itself and then closing again by itself. There was no sign of a child. So obviously I began to investigate. First, I traced the history of the house, but found nothing to suggest a reason for the haunting. So I then began to trace the history of the monk's bench. To do this, I had to examine the monk's bench thoroughly, and in doing so, I discovered a name, place, and date carved into the corner of the bench. Obviously, it was the craftsman's, and from this, I eventually managed to trace the descendants of the maker. It turned out that the maker had made the bench for a wealthy merchant's son when the son got married. This gave me another family to find, which again I did after much searching. And I found out that in 1896, the young 7-year-old daughter of the merchant's son had died when she apparently climbed into a monk's bench owned by her father, and it had locked shut on her by accident. But this monk's bench didn't have a lock or even a catch. Until, that is, I examined it again and found a fill-in where possibly a lock had been removed and a new piece of wood had been inserted. It had been very well done and was practically undetectable. As a final resolution to the mystery, I asked a medium friend of mine to come in, and to cut a long story short, she conducted a psychic rescue to release the spirit of the young girl. And from that day onwards, the crying was never heard again. As a postscript, the family still have the monk's bench, and they're still living in Alderley Edge.